So I am so honored to be the opening speaker here. And as we think about the art of happiness, probably the one piece of us that's going to contribute the most to our happiness is to have a healthy brain as we age. So what I want to do today is kind of give you a sense of how you can build a better brain. So when we think about this, there's lots of research that tells us what puts our brain at risk. So this is a cartoon that was published in The Lancet, which is a very prominent medical journal, about a year and a half ago. And it identified 14 factors that puts people at a much higher risk for developing diseases like Alzheimer's disease. And it really gives it in the sense of a life course. So what happens in early life, such as education, what happens in midlife, hearing loss, depression, physical inactivity, and then what happens in later life, diabetes, social isolation. And so collectively, these things can explain about 45% of the actual risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. But each of those things are something that we have some control over. So if we have something that we can control, then we potentially could do something about it to reduce our risk of developing these diseases. So there are things we can't control. We can't control our age. Haven't figured that one out yet. We can't control our sex. We can't control our family history or our genes. So when someone asks me first, what they say is, what can I do to build a better brain and live happy? I always say, pick your parents well. Because if your parents live to old age, you have a higher chance of doing the same thing. But even if your parents don't live to an older age, you still have a chance because 45%, nearly half of the risk of developing a disease like Alzheimer's disease is under our control. And so you want to start doing something as soon as you can. So it's never too late, it's never too early, but it's better to be too early than to be too late. So what I want to talk about now is not what makes us at higher risk for disease, but what we can do to build a better brain. So let me put this in perspective. What you need to do is you need to build a reserve, okay? Now we're going to call this cognitive reserve. But so if you've not really don't really know what this means, think about it now of your financial reserve, okay? So on the screen here are 3 different people with 3 different bank accounts, okay? And the dotted line is the threshold for living comfortably. So all 3 individuals live a comfortable life from a financial perspective, but they have different amounts in their bank. So now let's have a new unexpected expense. So how many people in the room have ever had to replace their roof? Yeah, an unexpected expense and an expensive expense, right? So now you have this big expense and you say, oh, now I have this big expense. How am I going to pay for it? So all 3 people have the same exact expense. But the consequence of that expense is going to be very different for each individual, right? So individual number 1 may not have much impact on their life. Yes, their bank account's a little bit smaller, but they still have a big financial reserve. The individual in the middle is going to have a little bit of an impact on their life, right? Because they're just at that threshold. They're trying to maintain a comfortable life. But what about that third person? There's very little reserve. So that same exact expense is going to have a significant impact on their life. Now let's turn this in terms of your brain. So the dotted line now is the threshold for having brain-related symptoms. So but for the purpose of this, let's call it cognitive symptoms. So the beginnings of diseases like Alzheimer's disease. Okay? 3 people, all asymptomatic, living a good life, but they all have 3 different amounts of reserve or capacity they built in their brain over the course of their life. And now we put some pathology, some changes in their brain, like the beginnings of plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's disease. Individual number 1, individual number 2, individual number 3. I gave him the same amount of pathology, but what's going to be the impact on that individual? The first person is going to remain asymptomatic and may never develop symptoms because they have so much reserve in their brain that they can tolerate that. The middle person may have some very, very subtle symptoms that you have to find when I'm doing my fancy testing that we do in the office. But the third person is going to be devastated by this. So they're going to have significant symptoms. All three people, the same amount of an insult, but over the course of their life, they've built a different cognitive reserve. So how do you operationalize this? How could we do something about it? It sounds great as a model, right? Everybody would agree that sounds great. I'm going to do something about it. But exactly what do you do? So you've already heard this term resilience. And resilience simply means the ability to withstand an insult and be functionally normal. Okay? So we spent, this is how I always say, this is how I spent my pandemic. What? All right. They're making me stay here. I'm not really a stayer. I'm kind of a wanderer. But I'll stay. So when we think about building some resilience, we had to think about how to do this. And this is how I spent my pandemic. We spent a lot of time looking at all of our research data, and we defined 6 things that would build our resilience. The first is to build our cognitive reserve, so build our bank, right? The second is to look at how much physical activity we do, how much social engagement we're involved in, how much cognitive leisure activities we do. Do we practice mindfulness? That's not letting the weight of the world bear down us, being able to live and enjoy the moment. And then what we eat. And we put these all together and we created an index we call the Resilience Index. We spent more time trying to think about what other things we could look at. So we also thought about what makes our brain less healthy and how our brain is performing. And we put this all together to create what we call the Brain Health Index. And this allows us in just 10 to 15 minutes to tell someone exactly how healthy their brain is and what their risk is of developing a disease, but everything is actionable, right? So we can give tailored health information to people so they can start to build a better brain. So let me show you how we do that. We created this research project called the Healthy Brain Initiative. And so these are people who participated in our research project, and I'm going to show just a little bit of a smackerel of our data, okay? So we spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what do we do over the course of our lifetime? So we collect information going back as far as age 25 up to the present day, and we found that people who increase their healthy activities, like their physical activities, their social engagement, their diet, they actually have better cognition as they get older. They act synergistically, so they add together, and they're more than just the sum of their individual parts. Changes in social activity were associated with bigger brains, so the more socially active someone became as they got older, the bigger their brain was. People who stayed cognitively active, they had less evidence of injury to their brain. And so this would suggest that over the course of our lifetime, we can change our behaviors in a positive way. Thought about the outdoor space. So people who partake in outdoor activities, so enjoy green space, they have higher resilience, better cognitive performance, less vascular lesions in their brain. So if you live in a neighborhood that has lots of trees and parks, you have a bigger brain. And if you live in a neighborhood that has all retail stores, you actually had a little bit of a smaller brain. So taking advantage of our environment can make a big difference. So what's the biology of this? We studied what's called the epigenetics. That basically means a gene, everybody has genes. Genes make proteins, but genes are not always on. They turn on, they turn off. That on-off switch is called epigenetics. And so we identified 37 unique epigenetic sites that link to resilience. We created a score that can separate out people with healthy brains or not healthy brains. Then we identified the actual genes that this links to. And then we studied it in a big longitudinal study that wasn't ours. So we externally validated. And we can find a significant reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And if you have a memory problem, progress much, much slower. So in our people we follow, what we did was they come in, we give them advice, we give them health coaching, and we see, do they follow that? And the people who follow the advice actually, over the year, build up resilience. And the people that don't follow that advice, their resilience declines a little bit. And when they come back and get tested a year later, those people that are following that and building their resilience are actually doing better on pencil and paper test a year later than the people who didn't do those things. So, we study resilience. Resilience is really the key to happiness. There are many ways that you can do that, but this helps us explain why some people may develop disease and other people don't, why some people progress faster than others, why some people respond to medications differently, okay? And this is all mediated by your cognitive activity, your physical activity, your diet, your exercise, your social engagement. We created measures that allowed us to look at this so that we can actually give you a quantifiable number. We give you a score. And that means you can build upon that score because there's actionable points to this. So we know that there's correlates to healthy lifestyles, healthy neighborhoods that we can take advantage of. If we can define this resilience factor, this also gives us potentially a druggable target. Okay, so I'm not talking about drugs here. I want you to do lifestyle because I think that's the way to go here. But potentially we could also develop a druggable target. So we could think about combining public policy, lifestyle, healthy behaviors, precision medicine approaches, and development of new diagnostics and tests. And together, this will allow us to build a better brain as we age. So I want to thank you for your attention, and our vision statement is build a better brain, build a better you. Thank you very much.